Thank you for joining us. Everyone should be developing for wearables, and hopefully at the end of this talk you'll see exactly why I think developing for wearables is a no-brainer. How many people here have heard of the Google Glass or Android Wear devices? Okay, it's a good load of you. How many people here have an Android Wear or Google Glass? Okay, so a few less of you. And how many people are already developing for Android Wear or Google Glass? Okay, so actually a fair number of you. Okay. So just a brief introduction. I'm Chris Hardy. I'm Director of Customer Support at Xamarin, and you can follow me on Twitter at ChrisNTR. So a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to be talking about Android wearables specifically. Google Glass and Android Wear are both Android wearables. And we're just going to give you an overview of these two different devices. And then I'm going to talk about developing specifically for Google Glass, and then developing specifically for Android Wear. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about why you might actually want to go and develop these, apart from the fact that it is a no-brainer to do this. And then there's a Q&A at the end, and you can ask me some questions, and I'll be at the party later. Which reminds me that you should also, if you are going to the party later, make sure you wear your badges with you. Just add that in there. So a little Google Glass demo. You may notice that I am actually wearing the same glasses, but without the Google Glass on. It's rather difficult to show in front of everyone, so I took pictures beforehand. So this is the Google Glass. This is it on a table, at least. Some of the things you might notice is actually the Google Glass is only the section highlighted in red. The rest of it is actually just the frame that they give you. This side is actually the touchpad, so this is how you can control it on the side of your head. So there's the touchpad area. A different view, so this is facing the camera that's on the front, and then you also have the prism. The prism is about a 42-inch TV, about 8 feet in front of you. So if you need glasses like I do, you do need to have glasses or contacts in to see the Google Glass prism because it's projected in front of you. So it's a comfortable distance away, so it's not like you're kind of looking right in front of your eye, so you don't strain your eye. And then on the left-hand side here, you can see that we have our camera, and it also has a little sensor that can detect dark light as well. On the inside, something interesting is there's another camera. So there's actually a camera that's looking directly at your eye. And this means that you can do things such as when you're winking, you can actually pick this up as an event, and then you can do something within your application. They actually use this functionality already you can enable it, it's experimental, but you can do this to wink, and then it will take a picture. So if someone's wearing Google Glass and they're winking at you, they might be trying to take your picture. So they add this functionality in. It's a little bit weird, but it's an infrared camera that's pointing kind of directly at your eye. On the side, there's a few different things here. So there's actually a camera button on the top right-hand side. So if you don't want to use the voice commands and say, OK, Glass, take a picture, you can actually just press on the shutter, and you don't have to say anything. So you can take pictures rather than being super obvious about it, you can actually take it without saying anything. And there's also the power button here on the side, and then just underneath the power button, there's actually a USB port, so you can plug in a cable and you can connect directly to it. On the back, going back kind of around here when you're wearing it, you actually have a bone-conducting speaker. So you don't need to put anything in your ears to be able to hear notifications or sounds that it might produce, such as an error message, a success message, things like this. And then we also have a big battery at the back as well. So this is what powers the device and kind of causes that big thing to appear on the side of your head. So this is just an example of how you can actually use Google Glass by tapping. So this is swiping left. So you can see kind of live cards showing up stocks, weather in Boston. So the weather wasn't too great in Boston. This is in Celsius, in case you're thinking that it's really, really cold. It's not Fahrenheit. And so you can do things such as see the forecast, and these live update as you're kind of showing the device. This is showing nearby places. This has all kind of come from Google Now. So there's a night shift brewing company. There's a place to eat burgers, I presume. And there's a really nice kind of dessert place as well. And you can also tap this on the side, which will bring up kind of an Android menu. And it can give us directions, or we can call the place, or we can just dismiss this notification. So you can do this all within the kind of tapping without actually saying anything on the device. You can also do voice activated, so you can do things such as say, OK, Glass Google, and then you can say, what is the weather in Atlanta? And this goes off to Google. It needs to have an internet connection to do this. And then it goes and gets the weather back for you. It actually then reads it back to you as well via the bone conducting speaker. And there's a little issue with it showing up. It was a bit slow. But again, it shows you in Fahrenheit, even though I have Celsius. So this is the weather back this weekend. And it also does searches for you whilst you do this. So even though it knows you asked for the weather, it can also search for whatever you want. So this is one way you can do voice activation and kind of use the Google Glass. When James and I, this is James Montemagno, you might have saw him in the keynote with me. We went to Boston, from Boston to Raleigh-Durham. We were doing a .NET Rocks roadshow. We actually stopped off in Atlanta when we were here before. And I had a notification from Google on Google Now on my Google Glass, because it knew I was flying to Raleigh-Durham. It actually found this out via my email. And so it gave me a card, just like you saw with the stocks and with the weather. It gave me a card saying, hey, you're flying to Raleigh-Durham. Your flight's at 9:23, and it says it's landed. And it updates as and when it needs to and says, hey, you're going to be on this flight. It leaves in 30 minutes. And what you can do is, when you take a picture, this is when we landed, if you take a picture while that car's displaying, like you saw with the weather or the stocks, you can actually make a vignette, and you just press the menu button after you take the photo, and it will overlay an image on top. So this overlays the flight information. So it kind of puts a new perspective on images that you can take. So this is when we're checking into the DoubleTree in Raleigh-Durham. And so it says you want to check in at 12 a.m. I don't know if that time's quite right. It says we should have done it 12 hours ago. But you can see that the picture that it showed of what the hotel looks like actually looks pretty good. And this is a nice way of actually bringing more information to kind of real-world scenarios that you might want to share with people. It's a unique way that Google Glass is different from any other device that you might have that does this. Like you have to get your phone out, and then you have to try and overlay, put it in Photoshop, and make something nice out of this. Is really easy. A few taps, and you're done. What else you can also do is if you, on the power button, if you hold it down for a couple of seconds, this will then start recording a video. And so this is us, I think it's in Disneyland Paris when we were having a summit in Orlando. And so you can see here I'm hands-free. You can see me holding on for dear life. But this is actually recording on Google Glass on this ride. And I wouldn't do this if I had a phone with me. I wouldn't want to hold my phone out and hope that I don't drop it over the side. Oh, there's random music. That wasn't what it sounded like on the roller coaster. And so I wouldn't want to do this if I'm on the ride and I'm my phone over the edge. But since it was kind of, it's attached to my face, and I was pretty confident that it wasn't going to fall off. I wasn't 100% confident, but I was pretty confident. Then actually this is a nice, unique thing I could do with the Google Glass, and it has new experiences that you can record. A little bit of a demo, Android Wear demo. I was going to kind of show this kind of under a projector, but I don't unfortunately have a projector. But you can do very similar things here. So we have the watch here. You can do things such as say, OK, Google. And this then allows me to then search for anything. And it's now going to search for what it thinks I'm saying. And so you can do things such as, you can do the same things as say, what's the weather like in Atlanta? Or what is the tallest building in Atlanta? And you can get this information back without actually doing anything, because all you need to do is talk to it. It's not very good for anything that you're not talking to it, because you don't have a keyboard or anything like that. So Android Wear is a very different device. You don't have it in field or in vision compared to the Google Glass. It also doesn't have a camera that you can easily take photos that you don't have to be hands-free with. It's very much, OK, I got a notification, maybe I can respond to it on the device, but you can't actually just go and take a photo and share that with everyone. It's very much a read device, and you can sort of write to it by sending messages out to people. But it's a very different device to Google Glass. So just to kind of bring it back into context of what I'm going to show you here, since I want to keep in track on what my support team's doing, I built an app called Support Case Numbers. And what this app is it's an app that it's very simple. It lists the amount of cases that are assigned to my team member, and it has their gravatar showing from their email address. And it also is sort of glanceable information. So this is something that I can kind of open the app, I can wait for the data to load, I can say, okay, I have this information, maybe this case should go to another engineer or whatever. And this is built with Xamarin Forms and uses Xamarin authentication to log in. And then there's also some of my own code to actually go and get this information from our support system and then get that back. So I'm just going to kind of show you the code project that we have set up here. I'm just going to go over to Xamarin Studio. And this text on the side is very, very small. And I'll kind of show what this is at the top. So we have, since it's a Xamarin Forms app at the top here, which you can't really see very well, is our Xamarin Forms application. So we have our app.cs settings here. So this goes and basically checks whether we're authenticated already. If we're not authenticated, then it's going to go and authenticate us on the iOS or Android app. And if we are authenticated, then we then go to one of our other pages, and we have a list page, which then goes and displays our refresh button, and then we have our stack, and then we go and fill our list view with the cases that we have. So it's a very simple application. This took not very much time to actually build. We also then have our support cases.common library down here. And this is just a shared library that we can use to interact with our support system. And so this is where I get actually all the data from. So if this was your application that you're building, you would replace it with whatever kind of view models that you may have and your connectivity to your service. So it's not really too relevant in terms of doing anything specific with Google Glass or Android Wear or iOS or Android. It's just common code that you can share across all these platforms. And then so we also have our support cases.android application, and we also have a support cases.iOS application. So they're basically dummy applications which just call forms, and then we let forms handle everything in here. The only other thing that we have a login page renderer, which is due because of the authentication that we do on iOS, and then same on Android as well. So that's the application that we built. So I'll just go back here. What I want to do now is I say, what would this look like to actually develop on wearables? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about Android Wear development. What we've got to remember is that actually it's just Android, but for your wrist. So if you're going to be developing an application, you need to think about what people are expecting to see on their wrist. You're not going to want to actually just take exactly the same application and put it on here, and you have a really tiny list view that you have to try and get people to see. So you have to think about how this is going to look whilst it's on your wrist. Just a kind of little overview on what Android Wear is and what it isn't, if you haven't heard of Android Wear before. It's actually running Android KitKat 4.4W. The W stands for Wear. I think hopefully in the future they're going to just have it as 4.5 and then it will work on whatever device. It doesn't actually have any internet connectivity. It requires an Android device, so I have a Nexus 5 here. What this means is any connectivity that it does have goes through the device. If that device has no battery, has no internet connection, then the watch has no internet connection and it becomes a watch, which a lot of people will find useful, but you hope it will do a little bit more than that. To actually then package your application up, you must actually put your Android Wear app on the device. There's no store or anything that exists on the Android Wear watch. You have to develop an Android app which will then load your package onto the device when people install it. So you can't just download apps for the Android Wear watch. So I'm just going to kind of show you a demo. The screen recording functionality on the watch isn't great, so it might look a bit laggy, but when you actually use it, it's not too bad. So this is the watch. So you can tap on it, and this kind of shows the screen. To get to apps, you have to go all the way down to the bottom, and there's a little start thing. And then you can open up apps that are here. So we have a loader. This is going off to the phone, getting the device that we need, and getting the data back. And you can see here we're scrolling up and down on kind of the cases that come in. And so we have the background with the faces of the people who have the cases, but we have nice glanceable information that's showing on our watch that I can load up without having to get to my phone. So I'm going to just show you kind of what the code is that's involved in doing this and how we go about doing this. So going back to the same project here, one of the things that we do need to do is we need to create a new project type. And I'm just going to close these up. Oh, this is the older one. That's not good. Here we go. This is the right one. So we have a support cases.where project type, but what it actually is it's just an Android application. Its target framework is set to KitKat Wear support, so it's just another normal Android application. How many people here have done Android development? Okay, so if you're familiar with Android development, the good news is actually very similar for Google Glass and Android Wear. A lot of the idioms that you have on Android follow through to these two devices. So I've opened up our main activity, and there's hopefully everyone can see the text. Is that okay at the back? Okay. So what we have here is we just have our main activity, and again, we set the attribute on here to say it's an activity. Some of the things that are unique when we're going to be talking back to the actual Android Wear application to get data, we're going to be using a data API that Google provide, and this is why we have all these different callbacks to make sure we can get this information as it's connecting back to this Android device. Again, we have the familiar on create, so this is what's going to happen when the application on the device. This is all Android Wear specific stuff. And we have our Google API client builder. And this is basically our client to then talk to the handheld device when we need to. What we do is we actually set up our main layout here, and we're going to be using a grid view pager. So that's kind of the cards that you saw as I was scrolling through. And we also have a progress bar. By default, in our resources, if I just open this up quickly, we can see we set the visibility on our grid pager to be hidden or gone, as it's named here. And we have our progress bar that we're going to say that it's just going to load. So that was the loading circle that we saw previously. So again, this is just a normal Android layout. We have some specific Android Wear classes here that we're using, which is the grid view pager. We have onStart and onStop methods. This is then connecting to a device if it exists and when we disconnect from the device. We then use this Wearable class message API to then go and get the cases that we require from the device. So we pass in our client. We have a phone node as well, which we set up when we have our connections. And then we say we want to get desk cases. This is actually just a string which identifies the messages going to and from the device. So you can say, get desk cases, do this action, set this variable, this sort of thing when you're talking back, and get different information from our handheld device. And we'll be using a service, which I'll show you in a little bit, and we're going to be using that service to then interact both on the device and then on the watch as well. And again, it's just a normal Android an Android service. The thing that is the most complicated part around this is our onDataChange method, and this is a method that comes from the iData API that we're using. And there's a lot of code here that kind of does set up. The big thing to focus here is that we have our from data item, so we're going to expect a data item to come from our wearable service. And this is what we're going to then map back to real objects. And so we actually have a data array list that we get from our wearable service, which is going to be desk cases. And then we go through each of these data maps, and then we just add this to our list of desk cases. So this is just a list of simple desk case. With the Android Wear, we have name, count, and background. We actually originally set in the iOS and Android app, we just had a URL, and then on the iOS app, we would just load up the URL directly within our view. Because the Wear doesn't have any internet connectivity, we've got to get all the images first on the device, and then we send them over Bluetooth. Well, I mean, the device handles that for us, but we have to send them over Bluetooth. So we're actually expecting to get back an actual asset rather than a URL where we can then load up the URL for us. So this is just adding a simple desk case. So if I actually go to the declaration here, we see this is just a desk case result. So the desk case result has name, URL, and count. So this is from our common library. And then on my Android Wear, because it's specific for Android Wear, I'm going to set a background property as well. And this is just a bitmap, which we're going to display as people's faces. And then all we want to do is we want to make sure that we actually have any desk cases come back from our API. It could be empty. And then we just set up an adapter. So again, this is just like you would do a normal Android adapter to populate a list view or anything like that. We set our pager. So this is our grid view pager. We have an off-screen page count, so we can count how much we load up off-screen. So I only do 2 scrolls because generally that's all you need to load up beforehand, and it doesn't run out of memory by loading up the whole list that's off screen, and then you run out of memory before you've even viewed anything useful. We have our loading. We set the visibility to be gone because we've loaded everything, and then we set our pager to be visible. And then we have a few kind of handy methods here for converting actually our file to an asset. At the moment, there is, again, as I mentioned, there's no way of getting an image directly to the device. We have to get it from a file. And so we're decoding the stream directly here. So that's about it for in terms of getting the data on the device. Let me just dive into our desk card fragment. And so this is what we inflate to then display. So here we're just inflating our desk card layout. And again, I'll just open that for you. And so we have a linear layout here. We have a text view. We have 2 text views, so we're going to show the first name and the last name. And then we have our surname as well. So we have a count, which is on the right. We have our first name count, and then we have our surname at the bottom. And you'll notice here that we're not setting up our background as well. Our background is something that we get as a property of our fragment. So we have our card fragment set up here. Normally you would tell on your onCreate content view, on your onCreate, you would say what sort of fragment this is, but since we're setting the base class of a card fragment, which again comes from Android Wear, we don't need to do this. It's just a fragment that has a background and useful things to display on the card and gives it its layout. Again, here we're just setting properties. So we have our count, that we set the count variable, and then we can set our count text from our resource. So we have that count, and then we're just setting that as a string. And that would be the little purple. We have a little color purple here to have a little rounded, nice rounded rect color. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. And then we just use a common method here to cut the name up from the full name to be first name, last name, so we can have it displayed nicely. And if I just show the grid adapter as well, again, this is pretty straightforward. It's a fragment grid page adapter. You have to override specific methods, such as the row count. So we just have it as the amount of desk cases that we have. We have our background here. So again, we're using the background object that we have, which is this asset. So if the asset doesn't appear, we're just going to set a random background to make it look nice in case someone doesn't have an image there. We only have one column. You can actually swipe left, and you can see such as like a forecast or something like that. We only have one column, so we only set one column here. And then we use this with case helper method here to say, let's get this fragment and display it when it hits that adapter. So you could pick, if you wanted to, you could choose different layouts or different information you wanted to show within your pager. So that's all you need to do in terms of the actual Android Wear development. In terms of setting an adapter, it's a very simple list view, but actually because is on a device, you don't really need to do too much more than showing a list, showing the information that's required, and making it look nice and easy and glanceable information. On the actual Android side, since we don't have any data connectivity, we have our Wear service. And so this is a wearable service. You don't need to call this at all in your code. For the fact that I'll tell you a little bit later, but you package your app within your application. It knows that when that it matches when that watch loads up, it will talk back to the wearable, to the handheld device, and it will start this service up for us. So we don't actually have to handle that. And then we have our message received. So this is when it first tells us to go and get information. And then we handle this message when it comes in. And then what we do is we have our helper method here. So this is sort of the shared code that we have, which basically calls out to the internet and gathers the information. You'll see this again in the Google Glass app. And we have our data map here, which we're then going to go send back over to the wearable device. So we basically parse through the results that we get back from our service, and then we put either strings, we put ints, we can put assets, and we can send this as a data array list, which is what we set here, and we can map that back and send whatever information we want across. So it's sort of like serialization, deserialization, but done for Android Wear. And then once we've done, we want to just disconnect from the watch. We don't want to stay connected to the watch as long as possible, because that's going to drain the battery of both the phone and the watch. And then we have a helper method here, where we're going to create a Wear asset from a file path. So when the service runs, it's going to save it onto the device, and then it's going to, from the device, take the file and put it in an asset to send over to the watch. And then we have a little bit of cleanup at the bottom. So this Wear service is pretty straightforward. What I don't do in this is I don't do any checks for whether the Android application is authenticated. So you don't actually have to do any authentication on the watch, because it's talking to a paired device that you should have access to. So the authentication is kind of implicit from the fact that you're wearing this watch, you have your device, and you're connected to it. If you can prompt people to log in every time if you wanted to, but they'll be logging in on the phone. So you might want to make that not happen too often, otherwise they're not going to ever use your application. So if I then go back to the slides. To then actually get this to run on the device, what you need to do is you need to package your Android Wear app that I showed with the device. What's interesting here is Google actually have .beta or beta in their Android name. So I would assume this is going to change in the future and be a lot more straightforward. What we do here is we set up metadata in our Android application and say we're going to be bundling up an Android Wear app with our Android app. And then we have an Android resource file here called Wearable App Desk, which is short for description. And we set this in our Android manifest XML. In this file, we say what our package name. The package name needs to match the same as your application's name, and this will then get signed together and make sure you're not having an Android Wear app that's talking to an application that's not yours. And then we set version code, version name, and then we have a raw path res ID, so a resource ID. And this points to where our Android Wear is on our Android device. And then we basically bundle up the app. There's an easy way of doing this by going release mode, project, and then create Android package. And then we put this package within our raw resources file within our Android application. And soon this is going to be handled really easily by Xamarin Studio and Visual Studio. But that stuff is still work in progress. So now I'm going to show you the application again and just kind of show you what I hopefully talked through, and you can kind of see what we did here. So still we have to go through the same slowness on starting up an app. They prefer you to use notifications. And so we have our loading indeterminate here. So we're going back to the device. And then we have our grid view pager, which then is loading up different fragments as we're going through. And you can see the purple icon here, and you can see the first name and last name. So I think it's pretty straightforward. Does everyone agree? Okay, good. So stepping up the gear a little bit, we're going to be talking about Google Glass development. What you got to remember is just Android, but for your face. So anything you're going to be doing with Google Glass, you need to remember it's going to be front and center on someone's face. You don't want to be distracting people with hundreds of notifications that are going to be showing up on the side of your face, or lighting up the screen. The battery's going to wear down. It's not going to be a great experience for people. So as I mentioned, it is just Android. It's actually running Android KitKat 4.4. If you don't set the right settings on deploying an application to the Google Glass, you will see the tab bar at the top, and you can see like the Bluetooth icon and things like that. So that's pretty interesting. What's different about Android Wear and Google Glass is Google Glass can talk directly to a Wi-Fi connection, and it can also talk to an internet connection via Bluetooth. So you don't need to have an iOS or an Android watch directly connected to it at all times. You can happily connect it to the Wi-Fi and just use it without having a device. It does work with iOS and Android. There are iOS and Android applications for it, but again, they're not required. So if you're an iOS or Android user, you're not tied down just to this technology. It does also have its own Google Glass store, so you can put applications in there. You do need to have an iOS or Android device to load things up, or you can actually do it on the web. You don't have to have a mobile device. What's interesting though is they don't allow you to sell any of your apps on the Google Glass store. They have to be free. They're not allowed to have advertising. So it's not going to be a way of making money directly by doing this at the moment. Maybe it will change. So I'm going to show you kind of what I'm going to show through and what we're building. We should notice is actually, since we can have this connectivity and talking to the internet directly from the device, it makes it much easier to kind of code what we need to code. So again, we have our OK Glass here. I need to press the button to get it started. So I'm tapping on the side here and swiping on the touchpad so I can select different apps. I'm going to open the support cases. We then have this screen which is loading up the data. And then we have a card that comes up, and we have multiple cards that we can scroll through. So even though this is the same information, you can see it looks like a Google Glass application, and it is in a form that people are used to with the Google Glass. So I'm not trying to make it look like a grid view page which then scrolls up from the bottom. It's swiping to the right, because that's what people are expecting when you're developing a Google Glass application. So I'm going to jump back over to the code here. And so we had our Android app here. We do not need this for our application. We don't have a service or anything that runs there. And we actually just have a support cases.glass project here. And again, if I just open up the project options, this is just a normal Android application. We set the minimum Android target framework to be API 19. And then same here, we're just setting it to KitKat. So it's not even the Wear support, it's literally KitKat running on there. One of the differences is that we have a few components that we use here. We actually have the Google Glass SDK as a component that you have to download to access the Google Glass API. There's a few other things here, such as zxing.net.mobile. So this is a way of scanning information, and I'll tell you why we need to do that in a minute. Otherwise, this is just normal, a normal application for Android. We have resources, we have our layout. We have two different layouts here. We have gathering data, and we have QR scan, and I'll explain why this is required in a second. So we have our activity here. So we're having our Google Glass application. Because we can allow people to say, OK, Glass, we can actually just have it so we can say, OK, Glass, open desk cases. And so we can actually set a resource that allows us to set what we want people to say to do this via a voice command, so you don't actually have to tap at all. We have different objects here that we're starting up. We actually, if we're not authenticated, because we don't have a device that we're connected to and tethered to, we need to make sure that we actually have access to whatever we're getting data from. So I'm using the mobile barcode scanner here to scan a QR code, get results back, which is our result.txt, and then that will then use that as an authentication token and then log someone in. Authentication isn't really easy on Google Glass at the moment. They still have problems with exactly the best way of authenticating. It's still an Explorer-only thing, so they haven't made this a commercial thing yet. So hopefully they'll change that in the future. To display our cards, again, it's really straightforward. We have our gathering data layout here, which I'll show you in here. And so we have a Glass progress bar slider view. And this is because Google Glass doesn't actually provide that kind of loading thing in a nice way for some reason. I do not know why. So actually what we've done here is I created a project which has a slider view for you. This is just a custom control that was open source that allows you to do this. And again, we have our text, which is displaying gathering support cases. And so we say gathering support cases here. We then have our slider view, which we're going to set to be indeterminate. We then use pretty much the same code that we had on the Android Wear here to go and actually do all that interaction with the common code. We then have this create cards method, which is, again, kind of like what we did with the data map. Because we want to make it an actual card that we're displaying through for our card scroll view, we then need to actually create a new card, and we can do things such as set text or set footnote, or we can set the image layout. So we can have it on the left, or we can have it overlaid behind. And then we have our card scroll view layout, and we have to override, again, different methods, but this is very similar to our page fragment. So we have get position, we have count, we have get items, so we just use our card list to get our position, and then we have a get view, and cards have a view that you can use anyway. So that's nice and straightforward. Scroll back up here. We have access to the audio manager, so we can play sounds via the system service. So this one plays a success once it's loaded the information. So once it's done this, the information's loaded. It's going to make a ding sound, so you can know to look up, because you don't really want to be looking constantly at the loading sign. We have our card scroll view that we're actually setting up via code. We set the adapter, which I just showed you. And then we populate our cards object. And then we actually then set the content view to be that card scroll view. And that loads all our content in, and then we can start swiping left and right. So what you'll notice here is there's no interaction between any other device. We can actually just talk directly straight to the internet. You'll want to check whether you actually have the internet, but that's what we're doing here. And then we also have a create bitmap from method, which is almost exactly the same as what we're doing for the Wear, to then load things onto the file system and then display them as an object. So go back to the slides. And so if I kind of show you this again, we open the support cases app. Again, you can have multiple apps. So we have gathering support cases. It's showing that slider view. And then we show our card scroll viewer, which we can go through. And that's pretty much all it is to develop for the Google Glass. It's nice and simple. So why do you want to develop for wearables? There's a few different things here. So we have brand awareness. So Discover Card I had not heard of before I knew they had a Google Glass application where you could find out about your current balance. So it gets you really great brand awareness. Google are going to kind of pick on you in a good way and say, hey, you're developing for the Google Glass. We'd love to feature you about how you're being really forward-thinking and developing for these wearable, unique devices. And so Discover got a lot of advertising without having to actually explicitly pay for it, because they could say, we're on the Google Glass, and no other bank are or were at this time. It's also mentioned a lot in pop culture. So this is The Simpsons, and they are actually, Homer Simpson wearing something that looks awfully like the Google Glass. They didn't mention it was the Google Glass, but it gets mentioned in a lot of pop culture. It's always on the news. It's always talked about. So if your application or your company is associated with this, maybe not this picture exactly, but at least the device, then people are going to talk about, oh, did you hear about this company that started, developing their app for the Wear or the Google Glass. It's a really good talking point on how you're actually making this really easy for people to get your application or your service. And it's also just the beginning in terms of what this might turn into. A lot of you probably know that Apple are coming out with the Apple Watch. And so wearable devices is really just the start. If you already develop a lot of your code, like I shared a lot of code between iOS, Android, Android Wear, Google Glass, if you then have the Apple Watch to then develop for, you already have a lot of that code that you've written that you can then reuse. And then also, because you're developing for these unique devices, you sort of know what's the right thing for people wearing watches versus what people are putting in their pockets and having on a device. So it's really just the beginning. You can be kind of at the forefront of that. So hopefully you've seen why I think it's a no-brainer for developing for wearables. Who here is now going to start thinking about developing for wearables? Okay, that's a good number, happy to see. Thank you very much. There's a few code links here. There's a great Android Wear watch that Jeremy Laval created at the top. And then there's a Find the Monkey Google Glass app, which is a nice reference on developing a Google Glass application as well. So I recommend checking those out. And also the Meilleur app is up in the App Store, and you can download it with Android Wear support. So that's a really nice Xamarin app. So thank you very much.